And welcome to the Rest is Football. I think we can call this an emergency podcast. Alongside me is a friend of the pod. He's been on before, the Crystal Palace chairman, Steve Parish, whose club has been, well, what's the word? Downgraded, relegated, some might say shafted by UEFA. Following their FA Cup triumph, they qualified for the Europa League, but because of the multi-club ownership rules, they've been demoted to the Conference League, where they'll even have to pre-qualify. Must have been a testing few days, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, the pre-qualification thing was another surprise. I mean, the news just gets worse and worse every day. But of course, you know, we're absolutely devastated by, you know, one of the greatest days in the club's history, if not the greatest day in the club's history. And we all thought we'd qualify for a very prestigious European competition. But look, we're still fighting.
There's an appeal process.
Yeah. So we go to CAS, which is the Court of Arbitration. And, you know, we're very hopeful. We think we've got great legal arguments. We don't think this is the right decision by any means. We know unequivocally that John didn't have decisive influence over the club.
Tell people who John is. That don't know.
So John Textor, who was the principal of Eagle Football, who was the shareholder that fundamentally has the conflict, he didn't have decisive influence over the club. We know we proved that beyond all reasonable doubt because it's a fact.
And that is specifically in the rule that someone has to have a
yes.
genuine influence.
It all hinges on that. It all hinges on the fact that one person or one entity need to have decisive influence over two clubs. The first principles of it being that whilst you're in a competition, nobody can decide who wins, I guess, or share players, or, you know, I don't really know specifically what they're worried about, but they don't want a conflict in a competition where people are conflicted in terms of are they working for one club or the other club. That clearly is not the case. John's now sold, so it absolutely won't be the case when we get to the competition.
People will look, and I did myself, because I remember last year there was talk that Manchester City and Girona were in the same competition. They both qualified for the Champions League, and it looked like one of those clubs might be left out or taken out like you have, or demoted to another competition. That didn't happen. What's the difference this year?
So like you, I would go to the Premier League summer meeting and people would be scrambling to try and resolve issues that they might have had. You know, I think Aston Villa had a Portuguese club and Brighton had a Belgian club. So this would all go on once the qualification was resolved. And the test date, I think, was June the 3rd previously. So in the case of Man City and Girona, they found out they qualified for the Champions League. And then even if they knew through the season that it might be a possibility, they didn't have to do anything about it until it was a fact. This year, for some reason, they changed the date that they wanted people to have qualified effectively to the 1st of March, 2025.
Were you aware of that?
I wasn't personally aware of it. They, and frankly, nobody at Crystal Palace thinks they're part of a multi-club. So, even if we had been aware of it, we wouldn't have thought it was relevant to us. They did send around some circulars. They didn't send them directly to me. They sent a circular to our info@cpfc address. But notwithstanding that, we're not part of a multi-club organisation. So we just didn't think the rule had any relevance to us. Also, it was a circular, I think, looking at it in hindsight, that says they will change the rule. It wasn't carved in stone. I don't think that it was going to happen.
Some would say, well, if you've got John Textor and he's also involved with Lyon, the other club in this, who've managed to keep their place, people would say, well, it is a multi-club thing. What's the difference?
Well, I think most people would think multi-clubs, first of all, are clubs that are controlled by the same person or completely controlled by the same individual. I think that's what most people's...
Like Manchester City, they've got 11 clubs, haven't they? Something like that around the world,
Yeah, and I don't know what the arrangements are, but I assume, they've got the power to take every decision in those clubs. When we've seen clubs like Red Bull both play in the same competition, where clearly they found a way of delineating their governance, ours is already so separate. We don't know anyone at Lyon. We don't do anything with Lyon. We haven't lent any players from them. We haven't loaned them any players.
It's just basically a question that you've got somebody that's actually invested at some point in both clubs.
Yeah. And, there's this term decisive influence, which I think for most people would say, can you actually decide that something happens in a club? Not do you have one vote out of 4 in a situation where even that vote is never really applied. Everybody knows that me, the team at the club, run the club, very well supported by my partners, and, nothing's ever gone to a vote. We've never wanted to do anything with any of these other clubs. I don't particularly personally like the multi-club model, you know, so it's not something that we've ever participated in or wanted to have anything to do with. So, and that frustration is what led John to wanting to sell. So all of his public pronouncements before the 1st of March were how he didn't have any influence, he couldn't get anything done, and as a consequence, he wanted to sell. And he put it up for sale before the 1st of March deadline and subsequently sold just after.
Yeah. We talked about the Manchester City Girona. You talked about their other multi-club influences, Red Bull being one. Do you think there's an element here of rules for the big boys and perhaps something else for the others?
It feels that way, doesn't it? You want to think, I take everybody at face value. I want to think that people want to do the right thing. It feels so obvious that it's the right thing that we go into the competition, that we won the right to go in, that I'm still hopeful that the right answer, you know, can be found. I don't think that people are sitting around saying, we'll favour this club, we won't favour the other one. I think there's just more effort that goes into solving those problems and finding a way around it. That's what I feel probably.
Could you sense this was coming, or because it'd been rumbling, hadn't it? I'd heard it for the few weeks, and I kept thinking, no, it's ridiculous, it's not going to happen. But could you see it coming, or did it actually, when they made the decision, did it shock you?
I mean, we were so wrapped up in the win of the cup final, it sort of it unravelled, didn't it? Because Lyon actually only qualified for the Conference League, and they only qualified for the Conference League with a 98th minute goal. And the last game of the season, somebody gave away a penalty, and I think Le Havre scored the penalty to win 3-2 against Strasbourg. Strasbourg went down 1, Lyon went into the Conference League. And then a couple of weeks after the cup final, there was the French Cup final. PSG beat Reims, I think, and they were already in the Champions League. Therefore, they didn't need their Europa League space, and therefore Lyon got into the Europa League by default. So it really kind of unravelled over a slow period of time. And for me, first of all, I had no knowledge that you had to do anything for the 1st of March. And frankly, there were 2 other problems. Even if I had, there's nothing we could do about it. So there's nothing the majority owners of Crystal Palace could do to remedy the issue. This is fundamentally a rule to which we couldn't comply, because it was only the minority shareholder that could choose to take action. Now, the action they say they chose was to put their shares up for sale, which was then completed after the date. You know, we feel that there are a lot of very genuine mitigating circumstances and more than enough wriggle room to put us into the competition.
It's a bit of irony here, isn't it? Because I know we've had many conversations about football and about governance, and you're a stickler for the rules, aren't you? I mean, PSR rules, you've never
not even close. No, not even close.
Does that make it even more frustrating?
Of course it does. I mean, I think that, you know, everybody knows in football that we try and do things, you know, the right way. You know, we obviously fight for the position of our club and clubs like us, but we respect other people's position. You know, we go into open forums, we make our opinions known openly. You know, we don't hide in the shadows, and we don't break any of the rules. You know, one of the things that I don't like about the whole multi-club thing is that clubs collaborating can be a way around all of the, you know, financial rules that have got in place. So frankly, we don't really want any part of it. Yeah. So it is frustrating, of course.
Forgive me, I'm not quite sure how these things work, but Nottingham Forest played a part in this, because obviously they've benefited from it, because they've moved out from having Conference League qualification to now being in the Europa League.
Yeah, so we were told that, and I think it's been made public. I mean, there's basically these things seem to be played out in public. There doesn't seem to be a lot of confidentiality that comes out of certain organisations, but we're led to believe that that's the issue, that there's, you know, if there wasn't somebody that wanted to get in as a consequence, then there wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, so in many ways, probably yes. Somebody else's ambition is...
Yeah, I mean, look, people have got to look at themselves, haven't they, in terms of what they do. You know, some people will say it's fine, some people say it's not. I mean, I don't really have control of that. You know, I only have control of what UEFA do, or I don't have control of that, but I have control of what the arguments that we put forward to UEFA.
This is the price you have to pay for qualifying for European football, Steve. So it's your first time in your history, and then this happens. It must be...
I think it does look bad, because I think for smaller clubs like us, we're a medium-sized club, let's say. This is the dream, right? This is what keeps football alive. This is why everybody goes, because they think one day they might win a cup, you know, and as a consequence, they might qualify for Europe. And of course, you know, people are saying, oh, you're in the Conference League, that's fine. I mean, if you win the Europa League, you get into the Champions League. You know, these can be defining moments for football clubs, can completely change the course of history forever for you as a club. So, you know, it is a major thing. I think it's one of those things that football has to have a look at itself and say, what outcomes do we want? Do we want clubs that are winning cup competitions to get into European competition? Is that something we want, or is it more important if you finish 6th or 7th? And I'm not saying that I know the answer to that.
Well, if you go back in the history of European club football, there used to be something when I played called, I actually won the damn thing, called the European Cup Winners' Cup.
Yeah.
And that was the thing. And that's why when they did change the rule, the thing, that's why place for the cup winners of the countries was part of the European competition, I believe. So I don't think you have to fight your point about being cup winners.
Well, although I'm led to believe that there are forces that don't want the cup winners to get into to that competition.
Because perhaps they don't want small clubs that might suddenly win an FA Cup.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think it's a mistake on so many levels, right? Because I do think football lives off the dream. There's a long tail of supporters that support lots of clubs, and they think that what goes on in these tournaments, it could one day be relevant to them. I think it goes back to the Super League, doesn't it? If people feel they're locked out of these competitions, then I think a lot of the interest on, the broad interest in football could drain away. But obviously I think that, and I understand there's other people that don't think that. The bottom line is, in this instance, we're not part of a multi-club. The person that was involved didn't have decisive influence. Yeah. There are many other legal points that we've got, about the validity of the rule and the date and the way it's communicated and lots of stuff. And hopefully when we go to CAS, we'll get the right answer.
I presume you'll have to hire lawyers and all that kind of stuff for it, or not?
It's crazy. The legal fees are crazy. I mean, this is depressing about football. The amount of stuff now that ends up in these places is just bad for football. I really do think that, and I hate the fact that we're having to pursue these things in this way. But I do think that most fair-minded football supporters think that it's the right thing that we're going to the Cup.
Your fans are doing a march, aren't they?
Yeah, good on them.
Tuesday night. I don't quite know when this will be. We're actually in New York at the moment, where you can probably hear cars and sirens and all sorts, because we're in New York City because we've been here for the World. What do you think of it, the Club World Cup?
Well, I have mixed feelings about it, really. I mean, I'm really pleased for everyone at Chelsea. Congratulations to them. I thought it was a sensational performance. They've been excellent in the whole tournament. Look, it's interesting, isn't it, for us? If you're in football, big European sides, but playing big South American sides, you can't say that isn't interesting and doesn't have a layer of excitement to it. Obviously, the calendar, the strain it's putting on players when it's being played, I think, FIFA would probably admit this, it's the first version of this tournament, and there are a lot of stadiums that weren't full, and maybe they'll revisit how they do it. But look, there's always been a Club World Cup. The scale of it, the size of it, the format of it, I think probably needs looking at. But by the end of the tournament, it was a pretty fun day yesterday. It was a real competitive game. There was no doubt both teams wanted to win that game, and it was a good spectacle of football. And so look, on balance, I have to say it's been an enjoyable week or so following it.
If you win your appeal, you could be in it in 4 years' time.
Yeah, I think it's quite tough.
We'd have
to go on some journey for that. But yeah, look, I mean, again, if there is an access that's based on sporting merit to these things, and we can manage the load on players, and we don't damage the domestic leagues. The big issue with these tournaments, we've got a 20-team vibrant domestic league. The domestic leagues provide enjoyment and utility to people in countries all the year round, don't they? And that shouldn't be sacrificed, for competitions. I do think we've got to look at the amount of football. I think we've got to particularly look at the amount of international football, with the Nations League and releasing players. And the strain on the players is, we all know they earn a lot of money and all that stuff, but it is tough on the players. But, that doesn't mean that the tournament wasn't great, and I didn't like aspects of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Back to the Palace issue. What's the time frame now in terms of appeal? When can your supporters know what is going to go?
Yeah, so as I understand it, we get the written ruling that we had last week. So we get the written version of it with all the detail. And then apparently the appeal's 10 days. I mean, I think the Conference League draw is early August.
Who within UEFA makes this decision? Do you know? Does it go all the way to the top to President Chefrin, or? And if so, I hope they listen to this podcast and perhaps common sense will prevail.
Of course, I think Mr. Chefrin could resolve this situation. I think it would be a very good look if he did resolve the situation, because I think most people think that it's right that we're in the competition. As it stands, the way, and again, this is maybe one of the problems, if you're not in UEFA's orbit, you don't really know how any of it works. And if you're not in the ECA or any of these organisations, I think that it was an independent committee, apparently, that made the decision that we weren't in.
I presume the appeal will have to be fairly quick because the competition was starting in the not too distant future.
I think the draw for the Conference League is on the 4th of August. I think you'd have to check that. But yeah, so I think it needs to be wrapped up by the end of July.
Yeah, okay. Let's take a little bit of a break and then I want to come back with a bit more good news. Because I've not seen you, well, not in terms of the podcast, since you won an FA Cup.
We did, yeah.
We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to The Rest is Football with Steve Parish and me, Gary Lineker, today. Steve, I interviewed you just after you won the FA Cup and you were so ecstatic and it was a beautiful moment. You was there with your boy and it was, I mean, he hasn't had to wait as long as you, has he?
No, he thinks we do it every year. Yeah, exactly.
Describe now, you can go back and look back at it, how magical that must have felt. The first major trophy for Crystal Palace, and it's been a long history. How do you feel about it now, looking back?
Oh, it's just a sensational moment. For me personally, I've wanted Crystal Palace to win the FA Cup since my first memory. The FA Cup was the only live game on television when we were kids, and you would crowd around the television from the early morning, every move of the teams, leaving the hotel, on the coach. And of course, it was all magical then because you didn't have these kind of live feeds. So I wanted Palace to win the FA Cup, which was arguably probably bigger than winning the league when we were kids, since I was a kid. And then 1990, we got there with Wrighty and Brighty and the team. And unfortunately, it fell, in the last few minutes. Then having taken over the team, I managed to get us there and, with everybody's help, obviously with Alan and the boys, we got us there in 2015. And again, we fell over at the last hurdle. So, it was one of those moments where you just want to break that glass ceiling. You're fed up with glorious failure, of being the underdog and not quite getting there. And look, everything went for us on the day. I think we probably got a decision that went a bit our way.
Yeah.
But we've had,
you need that.
We've had 164 years of decisions not going our way in the big games. So look, and the outpouring from the fans was incredible. I wasn't really prepared for what it would mean to people. And in a way, you want every club that hasn't experienced that to experience it, because for the people and the community, it's just absolutely, incredible. So it's great for the club, and hopefully we can use it as a platform to go on from here.
I relate it a little bit to how when Leicester won. I mean, the FA Cup as well, that was just as special in a way as the league. I mean, the league was the miracle. I mean, that genuinely was, it couldn't happen. But that feeling of, because Leicester had never won the FA Cup either, and it's just a beautiful thing. It's daft, isn't it, how much importance and significance we give to the success of our football team.
But there is something about overcoming it. One of the moments I went to the cup final the year before, and Man United would be the first to admit they don't have a great team. It wasn't one of their best ever teams. Man City, again, in the final, fantastic team. Man United, they win things. That's what they do. They win things,
even
right?
when they're not
Even when they're not that good, they won the cup that year.
Yeah.
And it was a real lesson to me that winning, in some ways, you're your own worst enemy, with winning. And I think for communities like Leicester, communities like South London and Crystal Palace, it proves something to yourself, and I think it gives everybody some hope. So they are magical, magical moments in your life.
This is probably a slightly unfair question, but Oliver Glasner's appointment, it seems to me you've found a special coach there. Do you think perhaps that's your best coaching appointment? That's why it's an unfair question.
Yeah, I think, look, I've got so much time and respect for all the managers that have managed the club and done sterling work. Everybody comes in a different moment, don't they, with a different challenge. Oliver, I think it's fair to say, is part of a new breed of managers that are embracing working with people, working with the team in a different way, the club in a different way, and working with data in a different way. Managing how they manage the team based on not just what they see, there's still instincts and everything, but also, what the data tells them. And then obviously he's a great manager of people and a manager of the fans. I often say this, if you want to achieve something with a football club, get promoted, win a cup, you all need to be pointing in the same direction if you're a smaller club to bridge that gap to the bigger clubs that, have maybe got more resources than you. You notice with Oliver, he doesn't rub up against the fans. He brings them with him on the journey. He brings everybody with him on the journey. So it's not just that we want. It's an enjoyable process, doing it.
What was his reaction to the UEFA ruling?
Oh, he's just devastated. As are the players. He's won that tournament. The Europa League, and he feels that we can go deep into that competition. And of course, he knows, like we all do in the club, that we're not part of a multi-club. He deals with me. Yeah. I deal with everybody in the transfers. There won't be one person that's dealt with anything to do with our football club that will say any different in terms of where the decision making lies. So he thinks it's a bad decision. He's supportive in any way he can, but equally, he's a champion. He's a winner, and he'll get on with it.
Yeah, summer's a busy time for a chairman, obviously, and a co-owner. Is it a bit of a distraction from what goes on? Tell us what it's like being you've won an FA Cup. You got the end of the season. It's probably the best season you've had in your history, realistically. And then what does it mean for you? Then suddenly big clubs will want your players, and are they going to go? Do I have to bring in? It must be kind of immediately after that FA Cup final that you've got to concentrate on the following season.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was talking to one of the GMs of one of the big basketball teams that won a lot, and sometimes it is hard to enjoy it, but I mean, that was so big and so overwhelming that, I think I had 4 days just lost in all the social media and the commentaries and the great moments in the game, and enjoyed it with the players and celebrated at the training ground. So we did have a moment. Then we were faced with the Europa problem. And of course, as always, you're building for next season. And winning's a drug, right? I mean, we've tasted it once. We don't want to wait another 164 years till we go again. We want to try and push on in the league. We've got a very, very, very good group. Yeah. But, when the teams like Leicester and like us, we probably rely on a smaller group of players. Obviously, there are players that are of interest to other clubs, and we've got some interest. So you've got to be ready. Do you buy before you sell? When you don't really know what's going to happen.
Do you sometimes? This is perhaps a daft question. I don't know, but as a chair, when you've got this team and there's so many good players, is it like you get a phone call from Manchester City or a Liverpool or a Barcelona, and you just suddenly go, oh God, who do they want?
Yeah, of course. Of course you do. But equally, you have to understand where you are on the journey, and you've been a top player, and you move clubs. You've also got to be cognizant of the fact people love playing for Crystal Palace, right? The group are amazing and they love being there, but people want to progress their careers, right? And part of coming to Crystal Palace sometimes is the promise we make. We're part of your journey. Look at Michael's gone to Bayern. Look at all these players that have gone on. So it's about managing change, football clubs. You can't cling on to everybody. So there will probably be some change this summer, and we'll be the first people to wish the people that go well, and just make sure we try and bring in new young talent that can do the same.
Do you have like an order of events, right? So you perhaps talk with Oliver and your recruitment team, and you go, right, well, I think someone might buy him, so we need someone in place. I guess it works like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're squad planning all the time, aren't you? We're actually thinking about what we're going to need at the end of next season.
Are you that far ahead?
So you're that far ahead because you're looking forward to who's rolling off contracts. What age will certain players be? Will you want to renew them? Where are going to be the pressure points? So it's constant, and of course, it's not. Some of it you can plan, and some of it, like you say, you get a phone call and you need to react to it. So last summer we got a phone call out of the blue from Fulham on Joachim Andersen. We decided to sell him, and then we went and got Maxence Lacroix. So some of it's being nimble, some of it's trying to plan, and a lot of it you do have to do from a long way out, because obviously you can't get to the end of a summer and you've got 4 players out of contract in your midfield, or so it's a constant rolling attention that it needs.
Does it ever stop?
No. No. That's the one thing about football, is it's just very, very hard to switch off from it. Very difficult. Yeah.
And going ahead to a new season like this, what's your ambition for this season coming up?
No, a glass ceiling we need to smash through. We never finished in the top 10 in the Premier League, which is crazy, and that's what we want to do.
Last season.
Yeah, we're close. I mean, but I think the first 8 games,
such a bad start.
Such a bad start, and you can't catch that up if you're a team like us. It's very difficult for any team really. So we want a better start. Oliver's very, very focused on a better start. We don't have. Last summer, we did a tour out here that maybe wasn't the best idea really for preparation. It was a nice tour, played some good teams, but this year we're going to Austria, very much a pre-season camp with some games. Exactly what Oliver wants. Last year, luxury problem, but we had a lot of players playing internationals. For Crystal Palace, we had 4 with the England team, we had 2 with the Colombian team. Yeah. I think Chris was away probably last summer as well. So they all came back very late. And you saw it yesterday, I think, the way teams play now is so much more orchestrated,
It is.
And I know there are people that are railing against it, but it's very disciplined, and you need to practice, right? Some of the things that Oliver does take players out of their natural comfort zone. The way Oliver describes it is you need to get past the point where you're thinking about what you're doing as a player and you just instinctively do it. It needs to be that coach that you always do the thing instinctively. And for Oliver, that takes quite a bit of time. So he wants those players together and has a proper pre-season. So to answer your question, definitely, try and get ahead of the game in terms of recruitment if we can. And then also try and get the best possible preparation we can so we don't have as bad a start. And then maybe we can get into the top 10 and maybe we can qualify for Europe again and see if they can find another way to keep us out.
Well, maybe at the end of this season, you win a European competition. We don't know which one it's going to be yet.
Yeah, I mean, you get carried away, can't you? We've only won 1 cup, but yes, we could do, yeah.
Wish you well, Steve.
Thanks, mate.
And hopefully this gets turned over because it seems an absolute absurdity and grossly unfair to me.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Cheers, Steve.